the second chapter of Pink Floyd Deep Dive. I'm calling this chapter Shine On. It's going to be a review of some of the miscellaneous compilations and live albums, but I store all of my non-other box set related Pink Floyd CDs inside this Shine On box, which I ordered without the CDs in it, mostly because I was just interested in the box and the book, but I'll open it up anyway. So here's the front cover. Inside we've got a little tray that's reminiscent of an old 90s board game, and here's the book that came with the original Shine On box set. Lovely book. The original Shine On set was a compilation of 7 Pink Floyd albums. So following this timeline, there's a chapter for each of the 7 albums, a saucer full of secrets. It includes the lyrics, pictures, reviews from the time, as well as some info about the cover art. Here's Metal, Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals, The Wall. No info about the cover art here, probably because Hypnosis didn't do it. It was done by Gerald Scarfe. And A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Discography, credits, etc. So a really nice book, very cool read, reviews from the time. Underneath the tray, which is fallen apart a little bit, we've got this 7 things that we'll talk about here, starting with Delicate Sound of Thunder, so the 1988 live album, recorded on the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour. This has since been reissued in a digipack, but the booklet is basically the same. Quite a extensive booklet here with plenty of photos from that tour. Including all the musicians that performed with them: Tim Renwick, Gary Wallace, Guy Pratt, John Caron, and backing singers. Here is Pulse, the 1994 live album recorded on the Division Bell tour. Now this is not the version with the blinking light bulb in it. This is just a card pack, but still has quite an extensive pull-out little book here. Between the 2 live albums, I certainly prefer this one. I just think it's a more energetic performance, and having the full live Dark Side of the Moon is really cool. Now on to some compilations. We have this, which is A Foot in the Door. This was done for the 2011 remaster campaign, so uses the same audio as on the Discovery box set, with some typical, rather bizarre imagery from Storm Studios. And then we have the 2001 compilation Echoes, which is a far more expansive greatest hits of Pink Floyd on 2 CDs. And this booklet actually includes some original imagery as well as the lyrics for all the songs. There's the first half, and then you flip it over for the second half. Here is the Dark Side of the Moon 2003 SACD, which I amazingly found in a record shop for very cheap, which is crazy because you usually don't find SACDs at a used record shop, but I found it and just knew I had to pick it up even before I had an SACD player. This mix has been released elsewhere, but this SACD might still be worth seeking out because the high-resolution 2003 master of the album sounds absolutely phenomenal and is probably the best master of Dark Side of the Moon in stereo that I've ever heard. Here's the early years compilation, which is an abbreviated best of the 2016 early years box set. This booklet includes all of the liner notes that are printed on the individual year book style volumes within that package, and this just has some of the best of the audio components. Likewise with this, which is the later years, which is a single disc compilation, which is basically the best of the 2019 later years box set. I also own this compilation on vinyl, and it includes a booklet which is largely the same, just bigger. And underneath all of that, there's actually the original envelope of postcards from the Shine On box set, one for each of the 7 albums, plus the front cover. So there's the front cover, Saucer Full of Secrets, Dark Side, Wish You Were Here. Metal is not in here because I actually put it in a frame as a decoration because, as I said in my last video, Metal is my favorite Pink Floyd album. So there's that. And also in this video we'll talk about this, which is a collection of great dance songs, a rather bizarre Pink Floyd compilation from 1981. And so there's all the various compilations and live albums we'll be talking about in this video. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. I'm Brandon Ware. You're watching Angel 65, my channel for all things music related, music reviews, as well as music posts. Today this is chapter 2 of the Pink Floyd deep dive. I'm calling this chapter Shine On just because I keep all of these miscellaneous live and compilation albums in my empty Shine On box set. And we'll start in order talking about this, which I don't own a CD copy of. This is a collection of great dance songs, a Pink Floyd compilation from 1981, which I just listened to for the first time in I don't know how many years today. And I'll say right off the bat, the only thing that really makes this interesting is the re-recorded version of Money, which David Gilmour did entirely himself. Certainly inferior to the original with, I believe, programmed drums and everything, but interesting redo of the original song with the solo pretty much played note for note exactly as it originally was, and it includes Dick Perry performing his sax solo basically note for note as it originally was. Why a re-recording of the song was done, I have no idea. I believe I read somewhere that this album was released for contractual reasons. I'm not sure if that's entirely true, but yeah, very odd compilation, really for completists only. It only includes 6 songs. We've got One of These Days, Money, and Sheep on side 1, and Shine On You Crazy Diamond, a 10-minute edit where all 3 verses are compiled together, and it cuts out most of the solos and stuff. Wish You Were Here, and Another Brick in the Wall, part 2. So I suppose a very, very limited and incomplete greatest hits with a rather ironic title, but yeah, really for completionists only. I certainly don't want to sell it, but this is not a compilation I would go back to, and I certainly wouldn't consider it a great starting point for Pink Floyd, but it's interesting for that re-recording of Money, so if for no other reason than that you want to pick it up, that would be a fair choice, but does not come highly recommended, but it certainly sounds great this pressing, and I have no issues with it. So there's that compilation. 2 out of 5 because it's really kind of pointless. Going in chronological order, the next item on the docket would be Delicate Sound of Thunder. I do own a vinyl copy of this, which is missing 1 track that's on the CD. I think it's Us and Them. It was fun to listen to again. I am really excited to watch the restored and re-edited Delicate Sound of Thunder film when I get to the the later years box set, which I just recently acquired. I have seen the original Delicate Sound of Thunder film on VHS. I have not seen the revamped version, so I'm excited to see that. And I believe it should look pretty good because that one was shot on film. And this live album is taken from the exact same performance. So I certainly think the film is probably a better representation than just this album. It sounds good, it's got a good set list on it, but it's not the most exciting live album ever released. The set list, on the first half you get Shine On, Learning to Fly, Yet Another Movie, Round and Around, Sorrow, The Dogs of War, and on the Turning Away, so after Shine On you just get 6 straight tracks from A Momentary Lapse of Reason, all of which it's fun to hear live. On the second disc, it starts with One of These Days, and then we have Time, Wish You Were Here, Us and Them, Money, Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2, Comfortably Numb, and Run Like Hell, the classic encore of Comfortably Numb, Run Like Hell. And usually Wish You Were Here is placed at that part of the show, but it comes earlier in this set list. The artwork is certainly interesting. I've always been very awestruck by the light bulb man. I really don't understand what message there is in that or what it has to do with the title at all, but interesting live album. Definitely worth checking out, but I think streaming will suffice. I will say my LP, which is the 2016 repress of this, sounds awful. I don't know what was done to make it sound so bad, or particularly side 2 of it. There's just something wrong with it. I'm going to assume it was a pressing issue and not a mastering issue because the CD sounds fine. A much better live album, though, is Pulse. This one is far more enjoyable to listen to. I will say I do like that this has a bunch of tracks from A Momentary Lapse of Reason on it, and likewise this has a number of tracks from The Division Bell on it. It does include Sorrow and Learning to Fly, which I think are the standout tracks from A Momentary Lapse of Reason anyway. So the set list here, the first half is Shine On, Astronomy, Domini, which is cool. I do like hearing the live version of that. What Do You Want From Me, Learning to Fly, Keep Talking, Coming Back to Life, Hey You, Great Day for Freedom, Sorrow, High Hopes, and Brick in the Wall, Part 2. I think it's implied that it's Part 2. Then the second disc is where it gets really interesting because we have a complete performance of The Dark Side of the Moon, followed by the encore of Wish You Were Here, Comfortably Numb, and Run Like Hell. And I really enjoy having the full, complete Dark Side of the Moon. But again, I definitely think the visuals add something to this that is not there in the audio-only version, though it does sound great. I've always wanted to pick up the LP box set of this, but the prices are just staggeringly high, and I don't think I would listen to it enough to merit spending almost $100 on 4 LPs. That just seems a bit over the top to me. But having the complete Dark Side of the Moon is really cool. So this comes highly recommended. As I said in the unboxing, this is not the version with a light bulb in it. This is just a standard slipcase with a little book inside of it, and I think that's fine. I wouldn't seek out the light bulb version because I'm pretty sure the battery would have died by now anyway. Seems really gimmicky and silly to me in the first place, but really, really highly recommended live album. And of course the epic encore of Wish You Were Here, Comfortably Numb, and Run Like Hell is phenomenal. Those 3 songs in sequence just provide a really great finale to the overall show. Hearing the girls do their thing on Great Gig in the Sky, each of them just takes turns soloing on it, is really fun. They do a great job. I still don't think I definitely don't think it supersedes Claire Torrey's performance on the original album, but it's definitely a lot of fun. And seeing the visual, you can see them really get into it. So definitely shows that Pink Floyd was not just relegated to the 4 members of the band, or in this case the 3 members of the band. They really allow their extra musicians on stage to have their turn at fun as well. And I enjoy the Comfortably Numb version where Richard Wright, John Caron, and Guy Pratt do the harmony vocal of what was originally Roger's part, and then of course David comes in and does his thing. Really, really fun. So this comes highly recommended. You should definitely check out Pulse, and I think you can get the CD version for around $20, which isn't too extortionate. Sticking with chronological order, the next thing would be Echoes, which is one of the earliest things I heard by Pink Floyd. I heard Dark Side of the Moon when I was a young child. I heard the Foot in the Door compilation, which I borrowed from a public library when I was probably 10 or 11. And then when I got back into Pink Floyd after watching the Dark Side of the Moon documentary and listening to metal, I got a copy of this compilation from my grandfather. This is not that copy. I just borrowed his and eventually bought my own when I found a used copy in a record store. This is a far more complete compilation than A Foot in the Door and gives you a much better overview of Pink Floyd's entire career. That said, it does not represent the Atom. It doesn't represent More, Ummagumma, Atom, Heartmother, or Obscured by Clouds at all, which I suppose is to be expected. It would have been nice to have Fat Old Son on here, and I can definitely think of the track I would have replaced on it. We'll get there. Disc 1, you get, we start with the Syd Barrett era. We get Astronomy Domini and See Emily Play. This was the first time I had ever heard Astronomy Domini when I got this compilation, and I was just fascinated by it, and that definitely encouraged me to go check out the full Piper at the Gates of Dawn album. And then we get Happiest Days of Our Lives, Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2. It's funny that the compilation is called Echoes. Not a bad title, but we do get Echoes on here. It's a severely edited version. I say severely, it's still 16 minutes long, but we cut out about 7 minutes of audio. At this point, I had already heard the full version, but having not owned a physical copy yet, it's a fair edit. You still get the overall drama of the piece. I definitely think the full version still adds more ambience and just more energy to the whole thing, but the edit is fair, given that this is a compilation. It's followed by Hey You, an edited version of Marooned, where the full band never comes in. It's just keyboard and guitar, basically. Followed by Great Gig in the Sky, Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, Money, Keep Talking, Sheep, and Sorrow. Sheep is not my favorite song on the Animals album, but I suppose it's the most reasonable one to include, as it's the shortest of the 3 long tracks, and it still does have a very epic ending, and the transition into Sorrow is very satisfying on this compilation, I should say. Disc 2 opens with Shine On You Crazy Diamond, parts 1 through 7, so part 3 is largely edited out the same way they do it when they do it live. Gilmour's second solo is very much shortened. We get the 2 verses into Dick Perry's solo, and then it kind of fades out into the wind sound, which on the original album would have, of course, transitioned into Welcome to the Machine, but it just transitions right into part 6. You get the keyboard solo, which transitioned into Gilmour's slide solo, again edited, and then you get the final verse, and that just ends and transitions into Time. Funny side note about this, the booklet does include the lyrics for Time, but not the Breathe Reprise section of it, even though that is included as part of it. Into the Fletcher Memorial Home, which is the track that I would have subbed for maybe Fat Old Son, or really any other track except a track on the final cut. Even within the context of a compilation, that might be the most palatable song on the album, but I must say that spoken word section where he's naming all the political figures, it still just drives me absolutely insane, and I don't relinquish any of my comments I made in the previous video. I think the final cut is absolutely awful, including the Fletcher Memorial Home. The only interesting part of the song is Gilmour's solo, and as far as Gilmour's solo goes, not one of his best at all. We do transition into Comfortably Numb from there, which is one of his best solos, of course. And then When the Tigers Broke Free from originally the Wall soundtrack, and then included on the final cut. And again, another awful song. I hate it. I don't like it on the final cut. I don't like it here. I don't like that song. I find it whiny and annoying. And I would have really, in my ideal Pink Floyd compilation, neither Fletcher Memorial Home or When the Tigers Broke Free would be included. I think they're both awful songs. The good news is, after that track, we're done with Roger's voice for the rest of the compilation. We have One of These Days, Us and Them, Learning to Fly, Arnold Lane, Wish You Were Here, Jug Band Blues, High Hopes, and Bike. The latter half of Disc 2 is very interesting, because after Learning to Fly, we go to Arnold Lane, which is kind of upbeat, and then we transition, I would assume very deliberately, into Wish You Were Here, a song mourning for the loss of Syd as a collaborative partner in the band. Jug Band Blues, which is probably the darkest Pink Floyd contribution from Syd, into High Hopes, which is, of course, got a very melancholy feel into it. And then it ends on a very bizarre up note with Bike, which, again, that's the first time I had heard this song. I think it's a great ending to The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Here, I'm not so sure. It's a rather bizarre ending after you get this very melancholy 3-song sequence before that. But overall, if you're brand new to Pink Floyd, this is a really good overview and gives you a good feel for a lot of the highlights on their albums. I do like that you include a good chunk of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, and as I said, the edit of Echoes is a fair edit, and if you've never heard the track before, then it certainly gives you the overall vibe for it, because I think it's a really important track, and that is where the latter compilation that we'll talk about suffers. Echoes comes highly recommended. I would say it gets 4 out of 5 just because it's missing songs from 4 albums, and yeah, one of the I have to dock a star for Fletcher Memorial Home and When the Tigers Broke Free. I just don't understand why those are included. I think they are subpar Pink Floyd tracks, and I do not think they represent the best of Pink Floyd at all. I don't think they belong on a best of compilation. Really don't. Next in sequence, we've got the Dark Side of the Moon SACD. Of course, the 5.1 mix has been released on the Immersion box set, and then it's also included in the 50th anniversary Dark Side of the Moon box set and the standalone Blu-ray, which includes the 2023 Atmos mix. So if you're looking for the surround sound option, there's much more convenient ways to listen to it than this SACD, because SACD, of course, is basically considered a failed format, and most people don't have SACD players. I do. But the reason this might still be worth picking up is because the stereo master of the album on this, both in high resolution and on the standard CD layer, sounds phenomenal. I really prefer the EQ choices that they made on this version versus the 2011 remaster and the 2023 remaster. I think they nailed it with this one, and it's just the most expansive and best sounding overall master of the album. So if you can find this I would say is still worth picking up, and I do love the artwork. I think the stained glass window variation of the original cover is really cool, and I like the booklet too because it kind of takes on a scrapbook vibe and includes most of the original imagery. The SACD comes highly recommended. I can't see any reason to give this anything less than a 5 out of 5 because it's probably the definitive version of this album, other than the Atmos Blu-ray, I would say, and the packaging is phenomenal. So if you can find this for a reasonable price, even if you don't have the SACD player, this is still a very worthwhile purchase, I would say. I will say I also threw in the 92 remaster of Dark Side of the Moon, which I, as the Brits would say, nicked from a friend. We just were working on an old CD player, just messing around, and it happened to be in there. And he said, you can have it if you want, so I took it. And that's interesting because that is, I'm positive, the original master that I would have heard as a young child when I borrowed Dark Side of the Moon from the public library. I'm positive it was that 92 remaster. So I listened to that yesterday on headphones, and while I was outside engaging in other activities, and it was just outstanding. It really brought me back to being a child and just really brought me back to the memory of carrying around the little library CD box with the booklet taped to the cover, reading the lyrics and listening to that on a portable CD player, walking with my mother when I was a young kid, and I just brought back that memory, and I really, really enjoy that master of it too. I think it's a very flat, honest remaster. I will say the 2011 remaster, I think they really overdid the bass, and while it might have a crisper high end, it also just has too much low end in my opinion. That master is great. It's nice to own a copy of that. I stored that just in a CD sleeve in my Immersion box set, but overall this is the best master of Dark Side of the Moon in stereo I've ever heard, so this SACD comes highly recommended. 5 out of 5 for sure. Next we have A Foot in the Door, which is a very fitting title. As I said, this is the second thing I ever heard by Pink Floyd. I got this compilation when I was on a camping trip in 10th or maybe 10 or 11 years old. Again, borrowed from the public library. I remember listening to this in a truck while driving to our camp spot, and a lot of this stuff was new to me. Of course, I had recognized the 5 tracks from Dark Side of the Moon and the tracks from The Wall, but other tracks on this were completely new to me, including Have a Cigar and Shine On You Crazy Diamond, as well as the 2 tracks from the post-Waters era, High Hopes and Learning to Fly. At that point, I had no idea that Roger Waters had ever left the band. I assumed he was on those tracks. I didn't know any better, because it didn't come with the outer sleeve with the writing credits, just the inner booklet when I borrowed it from the public library. Other than, again, Fletcher Memorial Home being on here, which I think is a subpar track. I suppose I probably didn't hate it that much when I was a young child listening to this compilation, but I hate it now in the context of their career. But the title is fitting, and it's exactly what it says it is. It's a foot in the door. It's basically all the big hits from the 5 classic albums, all on one CD. So if you're brand new to Pink Floyd, I don't think this is a bad place to start at all. The track list is Hey You, See Emily Play, Happiest Days of Our Lives, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, Have a Cigar, Wish You Were Here, Time, Great Gig in the Sky, Money, Comfortably Numb, High Hopes, Learning to Fly, Fletcher Memorial Home, Shine On, Brain Damage, and Eclipse. Very good place to start. The only downside of it is it doesn't include anything pre-73 except for See Emily Play. So it doesn't really represent the Syd Barrett era all that well. Their psychedelic years and the transition up to metal is not represented, and metal itself is not represented at all, even though the cover has pictures of pretty much all previously released Pink Floyd artwork. So it wasn't until I heard Echoes later in life, probably another 5 to 6 years after I heard this compilation, that I really became a diehard Pink Floyd fan. So maybe had they included some version of that on here, it would have been, I would have got into them much sooner, who knows, but that's the one downside of it. So as a starting point, it comes highly recommended if you've not heard anything by Pink Floyd. As a good representation of their career, it's definitely not that. It is the best. It is the greatest hits, the most commercially successful songs on a single CD. That's what it is. So as far as compilations go, the sequence works really well, and the mastering sounds good to me. So I will give it, again, a 4 out of 5, just because I don't think it represents their career completely fairly, but as a starting point, definitely worth checking out. Next we have the early years, 67 to 72 Creation. This is a abbreviated, like, best of the 2016 early years box set, which I ordered this with the box set because I figured it'd be nice to have the best of 2 CD compilation of everything that's in that box as well. So what do we get on here? We get Arnold Lane, See Emily Play, the A-sides of the first 2 singles, Matilda Mother 2010 mix, which is interesting because it includes a different vocal performance from Richard Wright with different lyrics that ended up in the final version. And it also extends the ending of it, so you hear them kind of jam for probably an additional minute versus what's on the Piper album. Jug Band Blues 2010 mix, same take, same performance, just an alternate mix. Paint Box, which is the B-side of the Apples and Oranges single. I will say, interesting that Apples and Oranges isn't on here. But I've always liked Paint Box, which these are songs that until I had got the early years box set, I had never heard those non-album A-sides other than Arnold Lane, See Emily Play. So those first 3 singles, this is really my introduction to those songs. I had not heard those. I had not heard Paint Box before I got this. Flaming BBC Session, interesting. In the Beach Woods, which is one of the new tracks on the box sets, just some previously unreleased audio, kind of a jam, interesting. And then the final Pink Floyd single before they quit releasing singles, Point Me at the Sky and Careful with That Axe, Eugene. Not a big fan of the B-side. I don't think the single version of that song is anywhere near as cool as the live versions on Ummagumma or Live at Pompeii. But Point Me at the Sky is a song I had really liked, and I'd never heard it before I got this compilation, so that's a really interesting song. That immediately adds value to this, because most of those A-sides and B-sides are not available elsewhere. They were released on the early single CD, which was included in the actual Shine On box set, but I had never heard that, so if for no other reason than just having those a physical copy of some of those early singles, this definitely has value there. We get Embryo, which was on the Harvest Picnic record sampler, a song I had never heard. Again, never heard that before this. Ummagumma radio ad, 10 seconds of just nonsense before it transitions into Grantchester Meadows and Cymbeline. And then we have Green is the Color and Careful with That Axe, Eugene, all from the same 69 BBC session, with Interstellar Overdrive, Live at the Paradiso, stuck in the middle between Cymbeline and Green is the Color. Bit of a bizarre track listing choice there, but it's fine. Disc 2, we get 5 tracks from the Zabriskie Point soundtrack, or remixed versions of songs that didn't end up in the Zabriskie Point soundtrack. And I must say, I've never heard the Zabriskie Point soundtrack, so any unique music that's included on that, I've never heard. Apparently they couldn't license it to include it in the box set. On the Highway, Auto Scene version 2, Riot Scene, Looking at Map, and Takeoff. Of course, the Riot Scene is the most interesting inclusion here, because it's, of course, the embryonic version of what became Us and Them on Dark Side of the Moon, which they talk about in the Dark Side of the Moon documentary. So that's certainly the most interesting track from that. Although I will say I like the acoustic, psychedelic kind of hippie tracks that are on that soundtrack too. So perhaps I will seek out the Zabriskie Point soundtrack just to hear what actually did end up in the movie. Let me know in the comments if it's worth checking out if you've heard it. Embryo from a BBC session where they really stretch out and jam for a while. Adam Hartmother band version live in Montreux. That's interesting because this is just the band performance of it without choir or orchestra. It's just the band performing like a 17-minute abbreviated version of the Adam Hartmother composition, which parts of it really work. Parts of it are certainly a lot less interesting because the opening and closing of it with just guitar chords and organ, there's really no melodic content there. Really the horns are what provide the melody during that section. And during the Mother 4 section, rather than having a choir do these harmonies, it's just Gilmour kind of wafting on top of it, which is honestly, it's kind of humorous actually. It's a bit silly, to be completely honest, but definitely worth hearing just the band perform their version of it live. This is followed by Nothing, Part 14, which is a version of Echo's Work in Progress. So this is basically the embryonic version of the build-up into the 12/8 section before the song recapitulates the opening verse. And then we get 3 tracks from the 2016 remix of Obscured by Clouds, Childhood's End, Free For, and Stay. I'm not sure how I feel about that Obscured by Clouds remix. It sounds really good, but it's very, the hi-hat for whatever reason is mixed very, it's just very, very bright. And I guess it has an overall crisper sound than the original LP, but it changed the character of a record in a way I'm not sure I like. So I'm not sure how I feel about that Obscured by Clouds remix. I think I prefer the original version. It's not that these remixes sound bad, it's just a very different sound. And that crisp hi-hat, particularly on Childhood's End, it does hurt the ears a little bit. I'm not sure why Andy Jackson chose to mix it that way. I'm not sure why they chose to remix Obscured by Clouds at all. My guess is for the 72 portion of that box set, they really didn't have any other audio that they were willing to include. More on that when we get to that video, because there's the whole mix-up with the Live at Pompeii thing, which we'll talk about. But I feel like they just included the remix of Obscured by Clouds because there was no other audio from 72 that felt interesting enough to include, is my guess. To me, it seemed kind of pointless. That's probably the least interesting part of the entire box set, the early years, is the remix of Obscured by Clouds. I just don't see the point. Overall, though, if you're not willing to spend the absurd amount of money on that box set or even buy the individual volumes that have been released subsequently after the full deluxe box set, this is a good sampler of some of the better moments on it. Of course, there's no visual material, which is the big downside of this, and the upside of buying the full box set is that there's a lot of really interesting visual material on there, whereas this is just audio. But given that the original box set was absurdly expensive, I saved up for months to buy it when I was in high school, and at that time it was the most expensive purchase I had ever made on anything. I will say the box set was a bit of a disappointment when it finally did arrive in some ways, which we'll talk about when we get there. That's going to be the next chapter in this deep dive, is going through the early years box set, which I haven't gone through the full thing in quite a number of years. So it'll be interesting to go back to some of that archival material. But I do feel like this is probably a good summary of it, and this comes highly recommended over the box set if you're not willing to spend that amount of money. Plus, it's just CDs and none of that poster concert ticket crap that I really don't see the point in any of that. So this is really this is a great overview of the box set, and if you're not sure if you want to spend that money, then this is a good place to start to decide, am I actually interested in the material that's on there? Because this pretty much is the best of it. There's only a few things on the full version of the box set that are not included here that I probably would have desired, but certainly the buying points are the early singles, including Paint Box and Point Me at the Sky, the Zabriskie Point stuff, and the Adam Hartmother band version. Those are all very interesting to hear. And then we have another summary compilation. This is the later years, and this includes 12 songs from the later years box set, which I bought for the first time about a month ago. I haven't even gone into it yet. I had heard the CDs from it, but I have not seen any of the visual material in that box set, including the music videos for High Hopes and Learning to Fly and things like that. I've never even taken the time to look those up on YouTube. I don't know why. I've just never decided to do it. So when I get to that chapter of this deep dive, that'll be the first time I've gone into any of that visual material. But this is a good summary of the audio material, and I think this comes highly recommended. I really like this compilation. I think the mixing and mastering is phenomenal. The vinyl version is great too, with a abbreviated book version of the book that's in the actual early years box set. So what's on here? It's kind of a hodgepodge. Basically, the songs come from 4 different sources. We get Shine On live at Nebworth, Marooned Jam from the Division Bell sessions, One Slip 2019 remix, Lost for Words Pulse Tour Rehearsal, Us and Them from the Delicate Sound of Thunder remix, Comfortably Numb from Nebworth, Sorrow remix, Learning to Fly from the Delicate Sound of Thunder, High Hopes early version, Division Bell sessions, On the Turning Away remix, Wish You Were Here at Nebworth, and Run Like Hell from Delicate Sound of Thunder. So basically the 4 sources are the Delicate Sound of Thunder remix, the Nebworth concert, the Division Bell sessions, and the A Momentary Lapse of Reason remix. I will say in the previous video I had mentioned not being upset or anything with the Momentary Lapse of Reason remix, which I haven't heard since I heard it the first time 5-6 years ago. After putting this CD on, as soon as One Slip came on, the intro, I'm like, okay, it just sounds like a crisper, less reverb 80s version of the original thing. Not too different at all. But as soon as the band kicked in and you hear the drums, I was like, oh, wow, this is very, 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 very different from the original version. I was astonished by how different it was, and I think it's more prevalent on that track than any of the others that are included here. I thought the Sorrow remix sounded fantastic, loved that, but the One Slip remix, it sounds like a completely different song, honestly, particularly with the, I'm gonna guess it was not Nick Mason playing on the original. It's very clearly a new drum performance on this remix. And it's not that it sounds bad, it's just, wow, very different than the original record. Perhaps more authentic to the Pink Floyd sound, but very different. So if you want a sampler of that stuff to decide, do you want to buy that massive, behemoth, overpriced box set, then this is a good place to start. The buying points are, yeah, probably those Momentary Lapse of Reason tracks. And the High Hopes early version is fascinating. That really comes highly recommended to hear how it's different from the final version. So good summary overall. And I'm excited to check out the full later years box set, which I had never done before. But good CD compilation, and I enjoyed listening to this again, and it sounds great. So those are the miscellaneous compilations and what have you. Overall, what would I recommend from this? Pulse, Echoes, and probably these 2. If you're brand new to Pink Floyd, which you're probably not if you're watching this is interesting, but definitely not necessary. If you're a die-hard Pink Floyd fan, then this is worth owning, but if you're only interested in the surround mix and not a great stereo master, then you can find the surround mix elsewhere in cheaper, easier to play formats. Alright, let me know in your comments of the 8 things that we talked about, which ones do you have, which ones are most interesting to you, And do you agree with my picks as to which of these releases is essential? Excited to hear your thoughts on this, and I'll be back whenever I finish going through the giant early years box set. Have a great rest of your week, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.